The video that you're about to watch is like no other that I've ever recorded. Now, before I tell you what the video is, please subscribe, click the notification bell. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's really important that you do that because I'm being shadow banned. So if you're not already subscribed, please do so. So come over to BitTube because I post my videos first on BitTube. You can also find me on Library and also on BitChute. And this is all to do with YouTube shadow banning, where I'm getting a quarter of the views that I used to get. You can also follow me on Twitter, CryptoRichYT, and join my official Telegram announcements channel.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
This video is like no other video that I've ever recorded. And I am grateful that I've had the opportunity to have the conversation that is in this video. So I do a lot of interviews on my channel, but this interview really was something else, where I was moved to tears by what I was hearing. So this is one of the most powerful, profound conversations I think I've ever had on my channel. Now, those of you that are longtime subscribers will know that I've been covering the Electroneum project since it ICO'd late in 2017. And I've had Richard and other people associated with Electroneum on my channel talking about Electroneum. Now, something happened in July 2019, which is somebody else joined the team. And it was immediately apparent to me the difference that they were making. There was a depth and a quality to the articles and the blogs that Electroneum started putting out. And when I looked into it, the person that they'd appointed as their new PR manager, somebody known Ollie Acuna, or Ollie Acuna. This is a picture of Ollie that I found online. He's outside the United Nations building somewhere, possibly Mexico, possibly Spain, I don't know. And I looked into his background, and he'd worked as a journalist, as an investigative journalist in Mexico. And the nature of his work was such that he investigated government corruption and ended up being tortured and imprisoned in Mexico. Now, he's now safe and well, living in the United Kingdom, working for Electroneum. But I wanted to speak to him about his story. Like, how did he get here? Ollie was generous enough to agree to have this conversation with me. And I want to publicly thank him for this conversation, for being so open and vulnerable and authentic. Not only do I think Ollie is a great writer, he's also a really great storyteller. And in most of this interview, I'm just listening to him as he recounts some incredible tales of what he dealt with as an investigative journalist covering organized crime in Mexico. Now, I was moved by Ollie's tale. He's now in the UK, he's safe, and he's being supported by a British charity called Redress. And what Redress do is they work with victims of torture in order to get them justice. Now, I have a link to the charity in the description notes below the video, and I'd request you to give a donation to Redress so they can continue to support Ollie and the many hundreds of others so that they can get redress from the torture that they've been subjected to. Please show your appreciation for Ollie in the comments below. And I want to thank Ollie again for having this conversation with me. It wasn't easy for him. And I acknowledge him for his courage and his generosity in being this vulnerable and this open as he was in this interview. Thank you very much. Hey, Ollie, thank you so much for taking the time out to have a conversation with me.
Thank you for the invite, Rich. That's very kind of you. I know it's taken a bit to get this to happen, but finally we're here.
Yes, finally we are here. And I appreciate you actually agreeing to have this conversation with me. And also because I imagine you're incredibly busy because of all the things that are happening with the project that you're working with. Do you just want to say what it is you do? And then I'll go into what we're going to be talking about.
Okay, well, I mean, I've been a journalist since 1984, so I'm going on 36 years, more or less. I've worked for major news organizations, including The Guardian, ITV News, AP, which is Associated Press, United Press International, and a few other major news organizations. And currently I'm working as a PR manager for Electroneum.
Right, which is where I met you, and you've been there since July 2019. And I've seen the difference in the tone, and what I think is the quality of the articles. Right? Okay, because they have a depth to them that is often rare in the cryptocurrency sphere, in my opinion. But also they're broad as well, because you're bringing other angles and you look at other issues, and then you bring it back to Electroneum and what Electroneum's up for. And in this conversation is really, I just wanted to find out more about you. Like, because I did look into your history and what's happened and what you've done, where you're from in Mexico and what's happened there when you joined the Electroneum team. And it's more like I just wanted to get a profile of Ollie Acuna before he came to Electroneum. And it's very, very generous of you to agree to this, by the way, right? And just so everybody knows, I don't have a script. I did tell Ollie that, you know, in my background as a child protection social worker, I'm trained and experienced in being nosy and intrusive. So Ollie doesn't know what I'm going to ask him.
We'll see.
Yeah, we shall see. So Ollie, you say you trained as a journalist. Do you want to say a little bit about where you trained? Why did you choose journalism? Where did you train? What got you into journalism?
Well, long story short, my father was a journalist. He was a poet. He was a writer, a researcher, and I got that from him. So I helped him edit a few of his books. I helped him with photography for some of his books, proofreading, and so I had that from a very early age.
And this was back home in Mexico, right?
Well, my dad's from Guatemala, and I grew up in the United States. I lived in Spain for a few years, but yeah, essentially, let's say Mexico, just for simplicity purposes,
okay.
and not to make the whole history so chaotic. But yeah, so essentially, in 1984, I was presented with a brochure for a journalism school in Mexico. Sounded interesting. Decided to take that challenge on, and that was 1984. And about a month after I started, I got my first job as a journalist. So it took me. I left my job. I left school because I already was a correspondent, international correspondent for United Press International, and didn't see the point in studying anymore at that age. But then, more recently, finished my bachelor's degree and have a master's degree in broadcast journalism.
Right. Okay. All right. But let's go back. So you started at this school of journalism in Mexico City or somewhere else?
Yeah, no, in Mexico City.
Okay. And you went from wherever you were, you went home, you did that. Then when you finished, you got a job where, with who?
No, so I started studying in September of 1984. And in October of that same year, so a month later, I was already working for a local newspaper. And towards the end of the following year, so about a year, 3 months after working for that local newspaper, I started working for an international news agency known as United Press International.
Right. I got it. Okay. And then what sort of journalism did you start off doing, and how did your journalism career progress?
Well, I started off, obviously, first job was a local newspaper, so you kind of fill in the, holidays when people are off, you're on guard, duty, just receiving phone calls. Talking 1984, there were no laptops, no computers, so reporters would call in their stories from wherever they were, and I had to take dictation over the phone of their stories and then pass them on to the editing desk. And when somebody was sick or on leave, I would cover their beat for them. So I was covering everything from crime to politics, finance, sports, but found that my greatest interest was in both sports and organized crime.
Sports and organized crime?
A weird combination.
Is there a difference?
No, probably not. No, there is. There's a huge difference. Sports comes from me growing up with sports and being a basketball player all my life. I just love sports, and that's why I found that to be really interesting. And again, we're talking back in the 80s, early 90s, when there were no computers. So getting stats, I was covering sport events, and I was taking stats by myself, and I was taking amazing stats and predicting games. So that was really a lot of fun, because based on my stats, which a lot of other journalists started asking me for, because they realized, God, this guy has amazing stats and he's making amazing predictions based on those. Let's see if he'll share those with us. And of course, I did. I shared them how I was taking the stats and everything, and they started following my lead. So I do love numbers, and basically it's because of numbers, the statistics, and all that, and because I love sports. And then organized crime is just out of curiosity, really. I mean, it was just interesting to learn, the connections between drug traffickers, government, police, corruption, elections, because organized crime, particularly in Mexico, has to do with everything. And you just said it yourself, sports. They're into sports. They're in tourism. Organized crime is everywhere in Mexico.
Right.
Why?
And I think, in my opinion, it's pretty much everywhere. Wherever human beings are and congregate, and organized crime will be there. But perhaps it's more overt and obvious in Mexico than it might be in other countries.
And I think it's the same case for many Latin American countries, and that has to do a lot with U.S. intervention. So I don't want to sound too leftist here or too anti-imperialistic, but the fact is the United States does intervene everywhere they can, and in doing so, they ruin the local culture. They bring in and they incentivize corruption in the way they do things. I mean, a lot of the police, or the elite police in Mexico and elite military, they train in the U.S. and they train in enhanced interrogations.
You mean torture, Ollie? They trained in torture.
Essentially, and they are also trained in investigations. But when they come back to Mexico, they find torturing people is much easier, and they find that to be much easier because they're involved in organized crime. So, and because they want to inflate the numbers, they want to make sure that they have good crime fighting numbers. They torture a lot of people to confess to crimes they themselves are committing.
Right. Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. So let's go into the organized crime account of your. Let me say that again. All right. Let's go into the organized crime aspect of your journalistic career, because that's what eventually led you, I think, to come to the UK. From what I've read, that's publicly available.
Yes, that's in a very large way.
Yes. So how did you start off doing organized crime? What did you cover? Just take us through an account of it, please.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So when I was working for UPI, I started covering a lot of the stories that were coming out of the border. They just seemed so odd and so interesting at the same time, and it was about how people were getting caught with secret compartments packed with drugs in their vehicles. And that, to me, became very interesting because it was at a time when we still had telex, and we would get, the telex is like the New York Facts or a newswire per se, but we were also hooked up with the government. So we were getting all the information, even cross information from government to government, or internal government communication. And I was looking at the reasons why they were capturing these people, and it just seemed interesting because sometimes, for instance, one case was of a woman. Her handbag was made of cocaine, right?
A handbag made of cocaine.
Yeah, they processed it in a way that they mixed it in with the materials they used to make the bag. And the way customs found out about it is because they emptied the bag and it was still really heavy, and they couldn't see why it was so heavy. So in further inspection of it, they found that it had elements to it that were not the typical or traditional elements you would find in a plastic or polyester bag or even a leather bag. So they continued their investigation into the bag and found that it had cocaine in it, mixed into the fabrication of the bag itself. And that's just one case. I mean, there's so many cases. I mean, there's this one guy that was walking across the border with a couple bottles of wine, which is perfectly all right. I've done so I did so on many occasions when living in California and was going across the border to TJ and bringing back tequila. You could walk across the border with 1 or 2 bottles of tequila. That was perfectly all right. So this person was walking across the border with wine, which probably should have been a red flag to begin with. Why would you bring red wine from Mexico? But and so they weighed the bottles, and the bottles were way heavier than they were supposed to be. So again, they they opened up the bottles and did a testing of the bottle, and it had cocaine inside of it. Now, I'm not amazed at that because I was living in Sinaloa, which is the northwestern state of Mexico, probably the most dangerous one, and definitely the cradle of 80% of the Mexican drug traffickers, or of even drug traffickers around the world. I found that I've just lost where I was. Where was I?
You were living in the northwest of Mexico, which is where
yeah. Right, where all the drug traffickers are.
Yeah, you weren't surprised by...
Yeah, because yeah, exactly, because I seen them walking around with little bottles of Coca-Cola, for example, or just bottles of water, and you look at it and it's pure water, and then they would come over and they would tell you, look what I can do with this. And for example, I had this one friend or neighbor used to walk around with a bottle of water all the time, and I said, well, why do you always have the same bottle of water? And he said, oh, I'll show you, look what I can do with it. And he emptied it in a cup. A little bit he emptied it in a cup, and then he poured a few dots of ether on it, and boom, thing turned into a crystal meth. A rock of it appeared in the bottom of it, and I'm like, wow, that is amazing. And this is where you find out these guys got tremendous ingenuity to smuggle all sorts of drugs across the border. And that's definitely where I found out they're never going to control this. And in going to Sinaloa, because initially I went to Sinaloa to cover a few stories for UPI, and that just was a mind-blowing experience because I realized, wow, drug trafficking is big, and the involvement of the government or the state actors is huge. It's huge, and it's so huge that the title of my book, when I started writing my book, was going to be Organized Crime. Well, in Spanish, it would literally loosely translate to crime organized by the government. In Spanish, it makes sense because it sounds like organized crime by the government. So, it doesn't have that turnaround. But essentially, that's what happens in Mexico. It's really the kingpins of all types of organized crime groups are, in fact, government officials.
Right.
They are the people that profit. And I can back this up with because I just recently saw a video report by Vice, and one of the reporters went to Sinaloa and they were talking to a bunch of drug traffickers, and it's exactly what they said as well. They said, yeah, well, we make money, but the people really making all the money are government officials and military, police, because that's who we pay off all the time. And that's who these are the people organizing the routes and protecting routes and collecting bribes and so on and so forth. So a lot of their profits go to the state officials. And again, I was in a lot of meetings where people didn't know I was a journalist. I was there with friends that just thought it was cool to allow me in these meetings, but they were meetings with heads of military groups, the Army or the Marines in Mexico or federal police. And it was about these people, commanders, captains, high-level officials, looking for drug traffickers to take on the work they wanted to hand down to them. So, like, for example, in one case, they had a large area, I think 10 hectares, where they were growing this amazing quality marijuana. And so they wanted to take it to the border. So they wanted somebody to be responsible for that. So, it's like when something goes sour, or who do they blame? They need somebody to be the fall person. So
right.
And they'll find people to do it because, if they're telling you we're going to be sending you 3 tons of high-grade marijuana to the border every month, and all you need is to have a buyer, you're going to find a lot of people that are going to say, yes, I got buyers, and you're going to deliver, and all I have to do is sit there and say, here to there, make millions. You know, it's a no-brainer for a lot of people.
Okay, wow. Okay, so we've got the local police, local and state officials elected and also appointed, like the bureaucracy, as well as in the army involved, the army being involved in everybody. Okay, now how does that intersect?
Up to the president. Just recently, well, in May of this year, that our newest president, Lopez Obrador, was found to be supporting. I mean, why would a president be supporting a drug trafficking group? You know, with government contracts and special tax preferences and so on and so forth. And that's our new president, who won on the basis that he was going to fight corruption and end organized crime and insecurity.
And he's wrapped up in it. And how does it intersect with the U.S. agencies that are out to prevent the drugs going through the north?
Well, see, now that's a myth as well, because and it's easily understandable when I explain it this way. We know for a fact that to fight anything that's prohibited it's a losing battle. It's never been won. When they prohibited alcohol in the U.S., it did nothing for them. All it did was increase jail population, increase violence. It was just a terrible era. The prohibition era in the United States was a terrible era. And we continue living these terrible eras where we're combating the unfightable or the unbeatable, which is drug organized crime. You're never going to beat them. So why even try to do that and not do what the DEA is doing sensibly and the CIA is doing not so sensibly, because they take it to another level. But what the DEA does, they allow for certain groups to do what they do in exchange for information to quell others. And they feel that they have control up to a certain degree that way. Otherwise, you just have a whole bunch of actors fighting against each other, killing themselves, trying to get control over corners, street corners, or selling points, routes, smuggling routes, so on and so forth. And you have everybody, an infighting going on for that. And that becomes very chaotic, and that also increases violence. So I'm sure people can see the benefit in dealing with one group and saying, okay, we're going to allow you to do this, but you need to snitch on everybody else that's trying to take over your business. So we'll protect you as long as you don't allow anybody else to do it. And anybody else that tries to interfere with your business, you need to report them to us. Whenever we have questions about anything, you need to respond to that. Whenever we tell you to tone it down, you need to obey. But obviously that gets out of control. We've seen that happen. Yeah. But it works. It's worked for the U.S. It's worked with the mafia. They've worked with the mafia how many years? You know that. We all know that. We all know that the U.S. has been complacent with certain mafia groups in exchange for information of others.
Wow, it's almost like governments become gangsters themselves. And I've done a few political shows on my channel. And by the way, just a reference, it's okay to be anti-war and anti-imperialism on my channel. Okay, not a problem.
No, it is. But I tag myself as neutral. I'm not. I don't go either way because I simply don't believe in politicians. I've seen too much, and I just don't believe in them. I know they're just a bunch of liars. They promise. Things they're never going to deliver just to win an election, and that's just the nature of politics, isn't it? I mean,
it's the nature of human beings, Ollie.
I mean, yeah. Well, in general, but politics even more. I mean, it's like tell a politician he can't lie, and then you're telling them, well, don't be a politician. Period.
Yeah, and all they are is legalized gangsters in many respects, except their turf, instead of being, say, northern Mexico and southern United States, their turf that they're scrambling for is, the Middle East or, whole parts and nations of...
yes, it's on another level, isn't it? The thing with Mexico is they're not invading or interfering in other countries, so they have no way of doing what they what they want to do with the power that they have.
Yep.
So what they do is take that that structure that they've gotten from the U.S. in dealing with organized crime and taken it to another level. And this other level they've taken it to is, well, wait a minute. Why should we allow one group to control crime in certain areas in certain sectors? Why don't we control it all and designate people and just learn from that? And that's what they've done.
Yep. Which, Ollie, I got to say, and then we'll go back to you, is like the Monroe Doctrine, but on a smaller scale. So this group of gangsters from the United States have been interfering in what they regard to be their turf, all of South America, for many, many years. You know, saying we're going to put in our local gangster here to take care of Brazil or Ecuador or Guatemala or Honduras or Nicaragua. We don't like that gangster. We're going to have our own. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Now, so you get involved as a journalist. You find yourself interested in these stories that you keep coming across about involving drugs. So then you start investigating. So what sort of investigations did you do? Where did that lead you to?
So my boss at United Press International, he realized, oh, this guy's really specializing in drug trafficking and organized crime in general, and immigration issues as well, but mostly drug trafficking and stories out of the Northwest and Sinaloa in particular. And he said, I'm going to have you do some more stories, and when things pop up, I'm going to send you to wherever they do. And we're talking late 80s, early 90s, when Sinaloa was becoming Colombianized in the way that people were setting bombs off to kill people, to frighten people, terrorize people. So it was becoming quite a lot like Colombia in that way. And so the first time a bomb exploded, I was sent over to Sinaloa to investigate and started finding out way more about what was really going on. And I just continued those investigations. And more recently, in 2001, I actually did a year-long undercover investigation into the Sinaloa cartel, paid for by Associated Press. Well, they never paid for it. I agreed with them to do the story. The story didn't end well because I ended up getting detained at the border. And when I got detained at the border, the AP office in Washington said, "Oh, we better apart ourselves or distance ourselves from this case, because otherwise this guy will sue our asses off, because we allowed him to go undercover into the Sinaloa cartel," which I was not going to do. The guy I had to deal with was the director of AP in Mexico City, and he called up the U.S. Marshal Service and told him, the guy's working for me. He's been working on his story. And they said, okay, fine. They tried to verify that with Washington, the head office in Washington, and that's where everything just fell through the cracks, because they did not want to admit that I was working for them.
Okay, so then what happened?
So then what happened, I served a bit of time in a U.S. jail, and went back to Mexico.
Okay. All right. Now, this story that you were working on, can you say what the nature of it was? What were you uncovering or discovering?
Yeah, essentially it was a massive story to tell people, and it was going to serve U.S. law enforcement as well, because it was going to be an insight of how the Sinaloa cartel was operating.
Right.
And how where the cocaine was coming in, where it was landing in Mexico, how they were reshipping it towards the north, and how they were smuggling it into the U.S. Once in the U.S., how they were distributing it across the 50 states of the United States. And when they had when everything was sold, how they were picking up all the money, bringing it back to one place and smuggling it back into the U.S. Back into Mexico. So that was one part of it. The other part was the marijuana side of drug trafficking from Sinaloa to United States. So, and that was about going up to the mountains where they were growing marijuana and poppy plants, so uh, for uh, for opium and heroin. And so I was going up to the mountains and looking at the plantations and watching how they harvested, how they processed, how they packaged, how they brought it down to the city, and then from the city to a ranch or to a illegal airstrip or to a boat to send over to the north, and then across the border again, the whole same process. The only difference here was from harvesting, packaging to sending over. And in the case of cocaine was just how it landed in Mexico and then how it was moved across Mexico and then into the US. So two slightly different. And the third aspect of it was the regular drug trafficker, not the big kingpin, and not the assassin type. Not the there's a particular group that a lot of people are not aware of, because we only see white and black. But there are a lot of gray scales within the drug trafficking sphere, and these are business people. It's what they are. They do business with drugs. They don't carry weapons. They don't kill anybody. They're not interested in that. They're only interested in making money. That's it. And so they look at it as a business, and that's how they carry it out. They wear suits. They dress like normal business people. They carry on their daily lives as regular people. And so it was more of an insight on these types of drug trafficking groups or people involved in drug trafficking. So you get lawyers, teachers, and everybody unimaginable involved in drug trafficking as a business, side business. Sometimes it becomes the real business or the center business, and then they leave their normal day jobs and continue just sending drugs or marijuana to the north. A lot of people didn't see marijuana as a lethal drug or as a life harming drug, so they really didn't even consider it a drug. So a lot of people easily got involved with sending marijuana to the United States. And then there's a line that a lot of people draw between marijuana and cocaine and heroin. It's like, this is okay because it's marijuana, it grows naturally, we're not processing it, we're just packaging it and sending it over. It helps a lot of people with pain, to sleep, whatever. Cocaine is a whole different story, and heroin is a whole different story. A lot of people will say, I'm not getting involved with that. That kills people. You get killed for that. And it's processed. It's a whole different ballgame. And that's the kind of group I wasn't really talking about, because anybody that gets involved in cocaine and heroin, these are now big time drug traffickers that are going to be carrying weapons, are going to be killing people, and are going to be in gun battles. So, but the regular marijuana smuggler is not. They don't care. They lose. Somebody rips them off 5, 10 kilos, even a ton of marijuana. They don't care. They'll just go back, pick up another one, and continue on, carry on. They won't kill the person that stole from them. If they can talk to them and get them to pay back, it's fine. If the guy gets violent for some reason, just keep it. Don't worry about it. No problem.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. It is this whole other world that I imagine many people are ignorant of.
It's a whole different world, and you wouldn't realize it until you're actually in it. You start seeing, God, this is way more widespread than I would have ever imagined.
Yeah. Okay. So your story could have blown that apart, or been some sort of major expose, shone a light on that problem. Were you able to produce it in the end, your investigation?
Yes. Well, the thing is, and I think a turning point for me was when I was working for a major newspaper. So I was working for the news agency, and that was all fine and dandy. I was able to write whatever I wanted to. A lot of the stories didn't even have a byline, or if they did, because we were selling news to the newspapers, because that's what news agencies do. They don't publish their own stuff, or they didn't back then. I mean, I know AP and Reuters, they have their own websites now, and they're news agencies. But back in the day, what news agencies did was just sell information to newspapers and television and radio newscasts, because they had correspondents all over the world, so they were able to put together a pool of international news for for newspapers or news organizations that didn't have the money to have correspondents in different parts of the world. That said, I was covering a gun battle in Culiacan, which is the capital of Sinaloa, one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico for both people in general and for journalists. And so I was in the middle of a gunfight. People were dropping dead left and right. I was taking sequences of people getting shot, falling down to their knees and then folding backwards, because it's not like in the movies where they get shot and they go backwards a half a meter or so. No, it's not like that. They get shot, boom, they just drop to their knees. They get a second shot, they just fold backwards, because the bullet does not impact on them. It just basically goes through them. And that's why that happens that way. So I was in the middle of that gun battle, and I had, and this may sound very presumptuous, but imagine the quality photos I had, the amazing photos I had of people dropping dead, people getting shot in the head, people getting out of their vehicles really, hostile, really aggressive and getting shot, stuff like that. I had like 2 rows of shots, and I was right in the middle, and they weren't shooting at me because they saw me with the camera. They were more concerned over the rest of the people with guns. So I was lucky and stupid as well, because I was right in the middle of it all. And then I went home and I started writing up the story, and got a visit from from what to me appeared to be federal police. And they said, "We know that you took some photos, and we need those photos." And I said, "Well, they're mine." And actually, they're not mine. The newspaper I work for owns them. And they said, "Well, we don't care. You either give us those photos, or everybody in this house and everybody is going to die. That's simple." And so what do? You hand over the rolls. And they said, "These better be the only rolls you have. If we ever see one single photo of that gunfight anywhere, we will come back and get you. Even if it's 20 years down the line, we don't care. We'll come back, get you, get your family. We'll find your family. We'll find your friends. We'll kill everybody." And of course you believe it, because you do. You simply do. I've seen it happen. People hold grudges, and especially in Sinaloa. I mean, there's some areas in Mexico where people are pretty, and I'm sure you find this in other places as well. I've heard this in like in the countryside in the U.S., where lawless parts of the U.S. But it's really, really, really distinct in Sinaloa, for example, where people will hold on to a grudge or hold on to the idea that somebody owes them something for 20, 30 years before they go out and kill them, or before they coincidentally, randomly run into them. They say, "Oh God, this is you, isn't it? Good boy," and they shoot you on spot. And I've seen that happen as well, because one day I was investigating this massive group of heroin. They were fabricating heroin, stealing cars, stealing homes, businesses. They had a massive operation, and they were trying to rip me off as well. They were trying to rip my car off, trying to rip off my business, and they were fabricating heroin right in front of my house, or right next to my house. My children could see that. I was not happy with them, so I started investigating them, and realized how deeply involved they were with government, and started denouncing that. And again, I was with a police officer, and he said, "Could you take me to one of the safe houses you're talking about?" Not safe houses, but the deposit houses you're talking about. And I took him there. And as we were driving, he looked over at the guy that was walking, and he says, "Do you know that guy?" And I said, "Yeah, that guy's name, let's just put an X name on it, because I don't remember the exact name." I said, "It's James whatever. Is this guy from this part of Sinaloa?" I said, "Yeah, I had a conversation with him, and I remember him mentioning he's from up in the mountains somewhere." He said, "Yeah, that is the guy." And I said, what's up with that guy?" He said, "Oh, that guy, he used to be my neighbor about 30, 35 years ago. And one day he kicked my door down and menaced my family with a gun. He didn't do anything to anybody, but he kicked the door down and threatened everybody with a gun, and then just left." And he said, "I hadn't seen him for 30, 35 years. The next day, the guy was dead. So I know this guy killed him."
Wow.
And just because of 35 years ago, the guy walked into his house with a gun, and that's the nature of things in Sinaloa. That's how things happen. And so you realize these people can be really dangerous. You have to be really careful who you deal with, who you talk with, what you say, what you don't say, how you look at people, because they will eventually come and get you. I mean, I saw this one son of a really powerful, really feared hitman in Sinaloa. His name was Chalo Araujo. He worked for Chapo Guzman, who's in jail in New York right now, and for Mayo Zambada, whose son is in jail in Chicago. And these are the two most powerful drug traffickers in the world. And this guy's name was Chalo Araujo. He was their security, head of security. And his son was named Chalito Araujo, the little Araujo. And this guy was 14 years old. He was already running around in I think it was a Discovery, a Range Rover, brand new car with like 3 other gunmen. But this guy's 14 years old. He's driving the car. It's a brand new car, big car. Got an AK-47, a gun in his waist. 14 years old, and he was killing people just because they stared at him. Mm. And why wouldn't you? I mean, you see a 14-year-old and driving this fancy car in the middle of a city. You go, what is that? And that's it. I mean, it just captures your attention for a minute, but that could get you killed. And in this case, it got a lot of people killed. Guy's dead, by the way. Fortunately enough, he got killed in a gun battle with military police. Right. This is how dangerous the little kid was.
Right. Okay. Fighting over turf. Now let's go back to the police visiting you and taking the
rolls.
The rolls, yeah. So what happened after that?
Well, I gave the rolls up, and from that point on, you make a decision that I'm going to continue writing, but I'm not going to be too specific about what I write, nor am I going to take photos anywhere that could get me in trouble. So you modify your way. You become a tad more conservative.
Yeah.
And way more careful, of course, which in the end didn't do anything for me.
So do you want to say what happened in the end and what led up to that?
Well, I mean, there's so many exciting things that happen in between it's just a long story.
Ollie, tell us. No, this is all fascinating, by the way. And I know you're working on a book, which I assume is going to be chronicling all these.
Yeah, well, see, there's 2 books I'm writing at the same time, which is stupid or it's lame on my part because I'm not getting any of them.
Or the mark of a genius.
Yeah, I doubt that. But the thing is, I'm not getting any of the 2 done, which is terrible. Because I keep forgetting what I wrote on one of them, so I go back and reread, and then I edit. I start editing, and by the time I get to where I finish writing, I'm like, I'm tired. I'm not going to write anything. So I haven't progressed any because I keep editing and rewriting. But anyways, yeah, one story is about the investigation into drug trafficking, and that story will be about about these business people, the teachers, the lawyers, that then start doing this as a side thing and then start getting fully involved, or the sons of these people that get fully involved from an early age, and how this is different from the drug trafficker we're all accustomed to hearing about. So, and I think that's very interesting. There's a lot of very interesting stories there because, again, they're inside stories, a lot of years of investigation and actually having relationships with drug traffickers and people that are involved in smuggling drugs, which in the end, they're all drug traffickers. But I just want to kind of differentiate from the drug trafficker and the business smuggler, per se. Let's put it that way. Or the business drug trafficker. Because they do think quite differently. But anyways, that's that part of the book. And it's obviously from my perspective on how I get involved and start seeing this and the action that happens all along. And the other book is more about about what happened to me when the government kidnapped me, tortured me, and threw me in jail for 3 years. So where did that come from? And how did that happen? Because it's not necessarily linked to the investigations I did into drug trafficking. That's more to do with uh, the elections in Mexico of 1988, where the president stole the elections. I was working for UPI, and I was sent over to his house. He was holding a special off-the-record conference for foreign correspondents only. And the reason for that is because at that time, foreign correspondents, foreign news outlets were very powerful and had a lot to do with the way policy was shaped in Mexico, because Mexican officials and Mexican politicians cared a lot about what everybody else was saying about Mexico. So it was a point where, as a foreign correspondent, you had a lot of power. But so I went to this meeting with that president, whose name was Carlos Salinas de Gortari, still potentially one of the most powerful people in Mexico, definitely one of the richest. But back in 1988, he stole the elections from leftist or center-left candidate Cuauhtemoc Cárdenas. So he stole the elections. We knew it. Everybody knew it. I've been covering the elections. I've been sitting at the Ministry of the Interior, looking at all the results, because for the first time in Mexico, the elections were computerized, and the results were going to be computerized as well, and the tallies were being done by computer as well. And so this was supposed to be a groundbreaking, game-changing moment for Mexico in terms of democracy and elections. It did not happen. They stole the elections outright. They potentially thought they were going to win them at first, but they lost them. And we knew it because outside of the polling stations, the results were put, and all the foreign correspondents and a few other journalists, we coordinated to go to each of these polling stations and taking down the results and then adding those up and seeing what the results were. And we all came up with the same conclusion, that Cuauhtemoc Cárdenas had won and Salinas de Gortari had definitely lost, at least third place. And when I was sitting at the Ministry of the Interior that would control the elections at that time, now they're supposedly independent. At that time, the government was controlling elections. And for the very first time, in an auditorium with a screen, the results were coming up computerized. And obviously, Salinas de Gortari was trailing like in third, fourth place. Cuauhtemoc Cárdenas was way up top. And suddenly, the system breaks down. And to make it more credible, the lights go out. But it was so obvious that the system had failed because they made it fail, not because the computers broke down or anything. They just shut them down because they realized they were losing. And so just to make it more credible, about a few minutes later, they shut down the lights and then they put them back on, like the energy, how do you call these? The emergency plants, electricity plants have switched on. But that was all BS, right? So a couple of days after that, I was invited over to the president-elect's home for a off-the-record news conference with foreign press. And in that conference, essentially what he was telling us was, yeah, the elections were fraudulent, but I'm not in charge of elections. I'm not in charge of counting the votes. I'm only responsible for taking on the responsibility that's been handed down to me by the electoral authority, which is the fact that I'm the next president. And I bluntly told him, but you lost. Do you feel okay with becoming a president of a country that did not vote for you? Are you comfortable with that? And he said, again, I'll repeat to you that I'm not in charge of counting the votes. I'm not going to scream out fraud. I'm not going to say, if they're telling me that I'm the president-elect, my responsibility now is to start, get the transition process rolling. That's my responsibility. And of course, all the foreign correspondents were so hypocritical because we had talked about this before the meeting, that how pissed off we were that the elections had happened the way they were, and how they were trying to fool us by saying that the system had broken down, and so forth and so on. And immediately after the meeting ended, all the foreign correspondents were taking photos with the president, and I thought that was so hypocritical because, you're a thief. why am I going to why am I going to smile and take a photo with you? I would feel very hugely embarrassed to do something like that. So I walked right past him, and as he saw me walking past and not wanting a photo with him, he stretched his hand out, like saying goodbye. And I'm like, I just did like this in disgust and did not stretch my hand out to him and just walked away. And I know from that point on, I was marked as an enemy of the state, per se.
Thank you, Ollie. Now, there's so much I could dig into. There is so much I could dig into with this, right? Because this whole story about your journalism career is so rich. Any idea when the book is going to come out?
Yeah, well, so the thing is, again, let's go back to the issues I'm facing. I was writing these books in Spanish, and now I'm in the UK, so it doesn't make so much sense to continue writing them in Spanish. It makes more sense now to write them in English and then eventually translate them into Spanish or write them in Spanish. So I've begun writing the book about the journalistic trajectory and this issue with the president, because it's not the only confrontation I had with him. I've had more, and that's why I feel that the issue I've had comes from him, and I'll tell you that in a bit. But yeah, so now I'm writing it in English. I've just started writing it in English a few days ago, and I'm on page 12, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm gonna put a lot of more steam into it, and hopefully I can finish it before the year ends, or hopefully Q1, because it's all here.
Yeah,
it's all here. I'm not inventing anything. I'm not creating anything. It's all here. It all happened. It's all true. So it's all just about sitting down and typing away.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to finding out about that and reading it myself, because it is fascinating. Now, you said you had more encounters with that president.
I did, because later during his presidency, I was sent over to the official home of the president, because in Mexico, it's not like in the U.S. where they have the White House, and that's where the president is, and that's where his family lives. In Mexico, there's the presidential palace and the presidential residence, two different parts. Sometimes they do business in both of these areas. So Los Pinos in Mexico City is the home of the president. So there was a news conference there. I went to it, still for United Press International. I was not happy with what was being covered there, so I decided to walk out. He obviously noticed, because he looked at me, and I walked over to the press room asking for the press release. I said, I'll just rewrite the press release, because everything he's saying is bullshit anyway. So I'm not going to get anything from his word, from his mouth, different to what I'm going to get from the press release anyway. So I went for the press release, and for some reason or another, they confused me with somebody else, because I was asking, so where can I get the press release? But obviously they didn't understand exactly what I was saying, because they said, oh, in that room over there. And it was a weird little room, because as soon as I walked in, I saw this man. It was a room where only this man with a large pigeonholes was sitting. It's like, like these things where they put the mail in, but instead of having it like this, he had it like laying down flat, and it was just full of envelopes, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just here for the press release. And he said, your name? I said, doesn't matter, just give me any press release you have there. He said, oh, no, but we have them by name. And still, I'm asking for freaking press release. I don't see the confusion myself. And this guy is shuffling through the envelopes, and he said, I can't find your name here. And I said, well, don't you just have a copy of the press release? And he said, don't you want your check? I'm like, I'm not here for a check. I just want the press release. I'm not here for a bribe. And then I quickly turned over to him, and I said, you got to be kidding me. There's got to be at least 200-300 envelopes in there. Are you telling me every single journalist here is getting one of those? And the guy still laughs at me and says, not you. You're not. And that was another huge eye opener for me, because suddenly I realized, wow, everybody is getting bribes. And this is true in Mexico. I would say 95% of Mexican journalists receive monies they shouldn't be receiving. Extortion fees, bribery, whatever you want to call it, gifts, whatever. It's unethical, but they're all doing it. And a lot of them just don't, sometimes you just don't have a choice. Because I can tell you about one occasion back in 1986 where a police officer called me to denounce the head of the battalion he was working with. And it was, I think, 1,000 people in that police battalion. And the police and the head of the battalion was asking each one of them for, I think at the time it was 500 pesos, which was equivalent to about $40, $50 at the time. So imagine how much money this guy was asking from each one of the people in his battalion on a daily basis. And the police officer that stepped forward with me to denounce this was saying, the thing is, I feel terrible stopping vehicles to extort them for money because I have to pay my captain, because that's the only way I'm going to come across the money he's asking for on a daily basis. How else am I going to get it? As a traffic cop, all I can do is stop people for things they didn't do and try to get a bribe off of them, trying to get catch them running a red light. I mean, I just got to do all these, circus acts to get the money this guy's asking for on a daily basis. So I was writing up the story, but as a new journalist, ethical practices, you have to call the guy you're denouncing to get his, to give him an opportunity to give his version of the story. So I called the captain up and asked him, look, there's a person in your battalion that's denouncing that you're asking for this much money on a daily basis. What can you say? Because I'm publishing the story tomorrow and I want to give you the chance to defend yourself. And the guy said, oh man, really? He said, just come over and let's chat. I'll give you all the information here in face to face. So I went to his office, naively thinking I was actually going to interview him or get some information from him. Once we were face to face, he said, what do you want? I said, do you need a house? Do you need a car? Do you need a house and a car? What do you need? Just tell me, name what you want. And I'll give it to you right now. Right now. How much do you want? In money? Do you want a property? What do you want? But that story cannot go out. And I just sat there and said, listen, this is not even my beat. Police beat's not mine. I'll just hand over the information to to the guy that's in charge of the beat. Oh, Armando Rios. Yeah. He said, okay, yeah, that's fine. And that's it. I just handed it over to somebody else. Did not look into what happened to that. But I realized at that point, I have two decisions here. One is to continue down the ethical route, down the route of honesty, or down the route of corruption. And once you're down that path, you never know what's going to happen afterwards because you're already dirty, aren't you? And now they have information that they can use against you or to leverage you to do things you don't want to do or to write things against people you don't want to write, because you find journalists in Mexico writing some really damning stories about people that don't deserve that. Fake stories. And you can only think that these are journalists that got paid, were bribed, and now are being leveraged to write about somebody that's honest, somebody that's straightforward, to write badly about these people. So, and these are the situations I never want to be in.
The ethical human being, the ethical man or woman who conducts him or herself with integrity, they're really dangerous.
They are to people that are criminals or that are wrongdoers. Yes, we are dangerous to those people, definitely.
Yeah,
we're in more danger than they are.
Yes, which then leaves you marked.
Yes, absolutely. And in places like Mexico, it's like it's really difficult to overcome, because once you're blacklisted, and I was blacklisted at very, very early in my career, that kind of becomes a obstacle for the rest of your professional career. And it did. It was a huge factor in my career in Mexico. But I was happy that I never fell for it. I mean, I'll be honest. There were times where I was, oh boy, I hope I get another offer. I'll accept it this time. I'm not going to be an idiot this time, because I have nothing to show for 30 years of career. I have nothing to show for it. So I think I'll accept next time they offer me something. But next time did come around and I did not. So I remained clean for the entirety of my profession as a journalist.
Right, so Ollie, tell us what happened next in your interactions with Carlos Salinas.
Carlos Salinas, yeah. So, yeah, well, there were many other interactions, of course, but and of course the president that lost, or the candidate that lost the presidency, I bumped into him on one occasion and asked him he why he allowed that to happen, and he said, and I actually straight out asked him, and I think I caught him off guard. He was stressed because there was a lot of violence sparking up around Mexico because of the elections of the fraudulent elections. And so I confronted him and told him, why did you negotiate your victory and gave it up to Carlos? And I think he didn't expect me to ask, why did you negotiate it, right? And he said, I negotiated it because I didn't want to be part of a bloodshed, because that's clearly what's going to happen unless I need to tell everybody to back off. I lost the elections and let Carlos Salinas govern the country. Otherwise, there's going to be bloodshed, and I don't want to be responsible for that. And I said, but you are responsible for stealing people of their will, of their vote, of their right to vote. And they voted for you for a reason, and you're now refusing them that right. But anyways, that's a different story. But again, in Mexico, everybody finds out about these things. So they know I have this information. They know I'm not lying. They know I haven't received any bribes from anybody. So I'm vetoed. I'm blacklisted. And that sooner than later becomes a problem. And it did in 1996 because I had to leave Mexico for the first time to exile. But first, let's go back to Carlos Salinas in 94. He left the presidency. And he announced that he was going to get a jobs in New York for the World Trade Organization, or for another organization, the World Commerce Group. I forget, it was two different ones. But and so happened to be in New York in 1995. This was in 1995. Mexico was going through a recession. Nobody knew exactly why, but the outgoing president was blaming the new president for the financial crisis. The new one was blaming the old one. Nobody knew exactly what was going on. I was in New York covering the arrest of a Mexican politician whose brother, by the way, got killed by order of Carlos Salinas, the former president that we're so much talking about. So I was there. He got arrested because he was carrying $20,000 in cash, which is illegal. He didn't declare them. And so he got arrested, and I was covering that. And when I was covering that, Raimundo Riva Palacio, who's a very widely known journalist in Mexico, was my boss at the time, told me, could you please find out what job Carlos Salinas has gotten in New York? Because he's just announced he got a job. Can you please investigate and find out exactly what that is? So I get the instruction. I find out Salinas is in New York, where I am. So I go to the Mexican consulate to ask for him. Nobody can tell me where he is. So I go to the Mexican permanent embassy or representation, UN representation. And at the time it was Manuel Tello. He was the head of the office. And so I went in there. I knew the guy. So he allowed me in, and I was in the office talking to him. And I said, look, I've heard Salinas is here, and I understand you invited him over to this office. And so I want to talk to him. And he said, well, I haven't. And as the minute he was saying, I haven't seen the guy, I could see at the end of the hall how Salinas crossed from one room over to the other. And I turned around immediately and said, he's right there. He's right there. And he turns around like saying, oh, God, he is, but he's on his way out. Sorry. I'm like, really? Allow me to talk to him? No, you can't. You can't go that way. That's a highly confidential area. He's going to exit through a private elevator. So I'm sorry. No, you cannot talk to him. But I know the guy, Salinas, saw me there because I saw his face. I'm asking for him. He's running around probably trying to get out of there without me seeing him there. And he understands the nature of my visit and the nature of why I'm asking for him. So he obviously doesn't want to talk to me. He knows me from the past, so he avoids me at all costs. So I finally find out that he's been named executive vice president of the Dow Jones. So I called Dow Jones, and at the time it was Peter Can was the chair, and Roger May was the head of press for the Dow. And I asked them, what is this new job that you guys have given Carlos Salinas? And they said, oh, no, it's not a job. This is just a honorary position that we give to anybody that has over $10 billion invested in the Dow. And I'm like, what? $10 billion with a B? And he said, yes. So it's just an honorary position. It's not underemployment. We don't do due diligence. We don't read. He just gets the job just because he's got $10 billion. And it's just like a voting or a consulting position. And I'm like, and do you care that those $10 billion were stolen from the people of Mexico?